Okay, we're on part 2 of these videos I've been doing. All right, my next favorite question is, what is my favorite fandom? What do I like to read of fan fiction? Now, if you don't know this, then you need to ask Hannah because she will tell you. But Hannah, don't say anything. Okay, never mind. Okay, I will give you a clue. It has to do with outer space. So which is my favorite fandom? Okay, here we go.
We're going to give you a little tool here that has helped a number of people. We call it the Biblical Worldview Train. And it has 5 boxcars to it. If you turn in your participant guide, you'll see in this copy, I think it's on page 10 and 11, 2 pages, and you'll see all 5 boxcars there. The first boxcar is the God boxcar. And what you'll see is we've put in 5 statements of biblical truth. Now, as you look at those statements, would you agree that all 5 of those statements are biblical statements? Would you buy that? Take a good look. Are there any that you think are not biblical? Okay, I think they're biblical. But guess what? They're not Bible verses, are they? They're biblical truth statements. There's a distinction there. In the second boxcar, we have 5 biblical truth statements about creation. Take a look at those. Would you agree that they're biblical, biblically based? Most people agree, but they're not Bible verses. They're concepts. The third boxcar, of course, is the humanity boxcar. And take a look at the 5 statements in the humanity boxcar. Once again, not Bible verses, but biblical truth statements. Now, sometimes a biblical truth statement needs several verses to justify, or sometimes it might need a whole chapter, or maybe more, okay? But these are summary statements. In the fourth area, we have the moral order component, and we've just given you 5 statements of truth in that area. Now, in each of these areas, we could have given many, many more statements, but we're only giving you 5 to get the juices going. And then the last area is the area, of course, of purpose. And the 5 purpose statements that we've selected look like this. Now, all 25 of these statements are in your text. I'd like you right now to work with your thinking partner, or partners, if there's 3 of you, to do thinking exercise number 3. And that is this. We'd like you to think of 2 more specific biblical truth statements that you can write into one of those 5 boxcars on the previous page. So if you want to focus in a little bit more on the biblical view of moral order, for example, I'd like you and your thinking partner to write 2 more biblically based truth statements that you can add to that list. Or if you want to focus in on God, fine. But just pick one area and think of 2 more statements that you can write. We're going to give you just a few minutes to do this. And go ahead and work together on this. We're not going to take time to hear what you've done. I'm sure it's excellent work, but you get the idea. Now, Bible verses really have to be available to support your ideas, but you don't always have to write them down, okay? You have to write down a truth statement that's succinct in one sentence, and you have to be able to support it with Scripture. Sometimes you can give a scriptural reference, like the teacher did here and sometimes not. Now, we want to practice extracting some biblical truths from verses. So let's take a look at a particular verse. Let's take a look at Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. It says this, God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. Now you have to think, okay, are there any things I can extract from that verse that tell me something about the nature and character and role of God? Think about that. Okay, well, yeah, there are some things. I think that this verse very clearly implies or teaches that God is just. Okay? I think it also implies that he won't allow himself to be mocked. Well, it actually says that very clearly, okay? But you can extract that truth from that. Now, it also says that God knows what's going on in people's hearts. It also says, with respect to moral order, that there are consequences for our actions. And you could even say this, that the just consequences of our behavior are things that we can't avoid. Now, thinking exercise number 4 is where you extract specific biblical truths from Bible verses. And we're going to divide this group into 2, okay? This group over here, you're going to take Philippians 4:6. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And your assignment is to say, okay, what does that tell me about the nature, character, and role of God? Think of everything you can. And when you exhaust that, then you say, okay, what does it tell me about what really is, about creation? And then what does it tell me about humanity, moral order, and purpose? You folks over here already know what I'm going to say. You're going to take Psalm 8, 3 through 6. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you care for him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor, and you have made him to have dominion over the... Okay, what does it tell me about what really is, about creation? God. And when you exhaust that, go on down the list. Okay? Go. As I was walking around the room, one of the participants said, boy, it's a lot easier to do this when you have a verse to start with. And that's true. It really is. In fact, I recommend occasionally in your own personal Bible reading, here's a little exercise you might want to try. Read one chapter, or just half a chapter even, and stop. And then ask yourself, what does this portion of Scripture tell me about the nature, character, or role of God? As I was walking around the room, one of the participants said, boy, it's a role of God. And just jot that down. And then look at it again and say, well, what does this tell me about what really is? What does it tell me about creation? Anything? And then what does it tell me about humanity? Anything? So you look at this same portion of Scripture from these 5 different vantage points and see what comes up. And as you get used to doing this in your mind, you can kind of develop these 5 different file folders, so to speak, of putting these thoughts into. And then when you come to develop your lesson plan, you can pull from those resources. What are some of the specific biblical truths that you came up in this side over here with respect to God? What does Psalm 8, 3 through 6 tell us about the nature and character and role of God? Anything? Okay, good. God is the creator. That's pretty evident from that. And he has control over it. Anything else about God? Ownership. Yes, very much so, implied by that. What does it tell us about creation? Yeah, creation has been ordained by God. It's here because it was ordained to be here. Okay, all those trees we enjoy looking at, they didn't just spring up by chance. Does it tell you anything about humanity? What does it say about humanity? And if we had more time, we'd talk about responsibility and moral order, and purpose. But let's move on here to the other verse, Philippians 4:6. What does that tell us about the nature and character of God? Yeah, he knows our needs. He is concerned about our anxieties, and he's there to help us with those, okay? What does it tell us about us? What does it say about humanity? Anything? I think that's very definitely implied by that verse, that we have a human tendency to be anxious. Otherwise, he wouldn't tell us, hey, don't be anxious, okay? And I think also, as with respect to moral order, that verse implies that we have a responsibility to come to God when we are anxious, right? And it also tells us something about purpose, specifically the purpose of prayer. One of the purposes of prayer is to help us at times when we're human tendency to be anxious. Otherwise, anxious, right? And it also tells us something about purpose, specifically the purpose of prayer. One of the purposes of prayer is to help us at times when we're anxious. Good job.